can see a few people joining, so I'll just wait for a few more to come in and then we'll get started. Good, lots of you today. Right, let's get on with it. Hello everyone and welcome to our Looker Studio bite-sized session, which is going to be on using Looker Studio for actionable insights. So I'll introduce myself quickly and then we'll jump straight into it. So my name's India, I'm a web analyst here at Fresh Egg, and as I say, today we're going to run through using Looker Studio for actionable insights. So I use Looker Studio near enough to every day, and I'm really excited to share some of my knowledge with you today and help you get the most from the tool. So this session should last about 20 minutes and we'll have a Q&A at the end. So if you've got any questions as I'm going through, feel free to send them in and I'll do my best to answer. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what Looker Studio is and how you can use it for data storytelling. Then we'll think about some things to consider before you actually start building your dashboard. Then we'll have a look at a few dashboard best practices, and we'll finish up with some little tips and tricks that will help make your life a bit easier. So let's get straight into it with storytelling with Looker Studio. So first things first, what is Looker Studio? Looker Studio, formerly known as Google Data Studio, which I'm sure a few of you are familiar with, is a free data visualization tool which turns data into easy to interpret, customizable and shareable dashboards and reports. So Looker facilitates building custom visualizations to tailor your reports to your data. It's a free to use tool, so it's available to everyone. There are a couple of caveats around the GA4 API with the quota limits that they've introduced. So as best practice for GA4, we now recommend getting set up on BigQuery and using that as your data source. We've got a post up about this on our website, and in our next GA4 BigQuery session, which is how to never lose your GA4 data, we'll go into this in a bit more detail. So definitely get signed up for that if you're interested. So what can you do with Looker Studio? So as I've said, you can easily create reports and interact with the tables and charts on those reports. There are multiple charts to choose from, so you can see an example on the right-hand side. You can use bar charts, pie charts, geographical maps, tables, there's loads to choose from. It's really simple to visualize your dimensions and metrics with these charts to make data really easily interpretable for your audience. The reports, as I say, are interactive via viewer filters, so you can change the date range or filter by specific dimensions, like, for example, device or marketing channel. You can see some examples again on the right-hand side. This enables users to really easily explore their data and drill down further. You can customize the navigation bar to include different pages for different aspects of your business that might be important to different stakeholders. You can align the report and the widgets in your report to match your company's branding. You can even add links to useful documentation or hyperlinked content, or annotate the reports to help give users useful context. So for example, if you had an email campaign that went live on a certain date and you saw a big spike in sessions, you can add an annotation to help give users that context. You can connect your dashboard to multiple data sets from various sources. So for example, GA4, Google Ads, Google Search Console, BigQuery, there's loads of connectors in one location, so you can turn all of that information into one report in the same place. You can actually blend these data sets. I'll go into a bit more detail on that shortly. And the final thing to add is reports are shareable, so other members of your team can edit, view, or interact with your report. You can send them via a scheduled email. When you share a Looker Studio report with another editor, you can both edit at the same time, which makes collaborative work really, really simple as a team. So connecting to your data set. Connecting to your data set is made really simple by Looker. There are 21 connectors built and supported by Looker Studio, alongside over 600 partner connectors. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go to Add Data. You then need to choose your connector. So you can see in the screenshot on the right, as an example, I've selected Google Analytics. You're then going to specify your data. So if you're using Universal Analytics, for example, you'd select your property and your view, or in a Google Sheet, you might select your cell range. I mentioned it's possible to connect to multiple data sources in the same report, but it's also possible to blend this data via a join. So blending data in Looker Studio. A use case for this, as I mentioned, if you had a Google Ads dataset and a Google Analytics dataset, and you wanted this all in one table to display sessions from Google Analytics and cost from Google Ads, you could join the two datasets by a common field, so something like campaign name. I won't go into the types of blends in a huge amount of detail because they can be a bit tricky to get your head around, but essentially a join configuration links the pairs of tables in a blend. It has an operator, so the 5 different types that I've displayed on the screen here, which defines how to combine matching and non-matching rows from those tables. You then have your condition. So I mentioned campaign name earlier. It's basically a set of fields that defines how the tables are related to each other. There are different use cases for different data sets, so it's definitely worth reading up on these and thinking about which of these are the most appropriate for the data that you're trying to blend. So the final part of this section, a bit about data storytelling. I've separated this into 4 themes. So the first theme is narrative. So essentially the story. What story are you trying to tell with your data? So storytelling is the means of sharing information to your audience. We've then got the data, so the data itself. So making sure we're thinking about displaying the most meaningful data points and thinking back to the narrative and the story, the data points that help best tell our story. The third thing is visualizations. So one size does not fit all. So thinking about and carefully considering choosing the right format for your visualization that will help tell your story and help answer key questions that might be generated by your data. And the final theme is insight. So the process of understanding opportunities from the data that you're presenting and helping your audience answer the why and the so what from the data that you've presented them with. So in summary, essentially, data storytelling is a method for communicating information to your audience with a narrative and effectively using visualizations to do this and help answer their so what or their why questions. I think it's really important to stress as well the psychological power of storytelling. So making sure that the volume of information we're sharing with our users is appropriate and helping them understand which parts are important. So not presenting them with a massive table with rows and rows of data that they can't actually think about the why or the so what because there's too much data there for them to understand. Helping them understand and process that data. So onto some dashboard considerations. So some things to think about before you actually start building your dashboard. So I would always say, don't ever start with a completely blank canvas. I actually like to go old school and get a pen and paper. And the 4 things that I'm about to speak through, so audience, layout, customization, and metrics, thinking about all these things prior to creating your dashboard to create the recipe for your dashboard. So first thing is audience. So thinking about who are your audience? What are the business questions that they might want to answer? Do they understand the different dimensions and metrics that you're presenting them with? Can you format the data in an easily digestible way to help answer their common questions? And can they make business decisions off the back of the data that you're presenting them with? The next thing is layout. So how can you format your dashboard in the most user-friendly way? I'll highlight here that spacing is really important. So making sure that your widgets aren't all really closely cramped together and they're nicely spaced out. Thinking about what filters your audience might need. So are they going to need to break the data down by device or country? Can you separate the dashboard into different pages? So for example, a different page per different marketing channel. And thinking about the colours you're using. So do they stand out differently enough? So, you won't use the two similar shades of blue on a chart that's really hard for your audience to differentiate between. The next theme is customization. So are there any customizations that you can make to your dashboard to help generate insight? So you can create your own calculated fields and you can create your own custom dimensions. So for example, you might want to create a field for content grouping of URLs to group your URLs by URL structure into different groups that helps users analyze big groups of data at one time. Or are there any calculated metrics you can create that might help users with their analysis? So as an example, in a Google Ads dashboard, I might think about adding a calculation for return on ad spend to help users understand the benefit of individual campaigns. And finally, metrics. So which metrics are the most meaningful to your audience? Which ones matter the most? What are the company KPIs and which metrics support these? Just because all metrics are available in your data set doesn't mean that you need to display them all. So maybe have you asked your stakeholders or the people that are going to be using your dashboard which metrics matter the most to them and which ones they need to look at the most? So next, I'm going to talk about some dashboard best practices. So some of these are a bit of housekeeping and they may seem fairly obvious, but they really help making using Looker Studio quicker and easier. So the first thing is having a contents page and a top line overview. So having a contents page helps users quickly navigate to the page that they need. And having a top line overview is really useful to give a snapshot of the most meaningful stats that users can take away key information at a glance. So your more senior stakeholders might not want to go through pages and pages of your report. They might just want those key stats that they can take away really quickly. The next thing is naming conventions. So I appreciate this one seems a bit obvious and a bit dull, but making sure all your dashboards and data sources follow the same naming convention will really save you so much time down the line. So Looker can become really, really easily cluttered, especially if you've got multiple users creating multiple reports in the same login and you're all naming things differently. Naming everything in the same uniform fashion saves a lot of time searching for what you need. Next up is comparison metrics. So again, thinking back to the story and the insight and the so what and the why, we can tell users a number. So for example, sessions last week were 100, but so what does that mean? So Looker's got a really simple feature where you can show the variance either against the same period the previous year or the period prior to the one that you've selected. Excuse me. And you can customize this variance color. So for example, if bounce rate has increased by 50%, you could show it as red. This really helps give context to your audience. And again, back to the story, helps them understand or drill down into the so what or the why. Finally is dimension and metric descriptions. So often people using your report might not be in the granular detail as much as you are, and they might not know what certain things mean. So it's really important to outline definitions for them. You could do this via a glossary page at the back of your report, or you could use tooltips, which I'll cover in a bit more detail in a minute. But you can basically hover over them and they'll give you the description of that metric or dimension. So the final part of this bite-sized session, which is the most exciting one in my opinion, is looking at some useful tips and tricks in Looker. So these are little hacks that I've learned along the way that might not be immediately obvious, but they really make the tool a lot easier to use. So the first thing is release notes. So Looker are always releasing new features. So it's really worth keeping up to date with the release notes and staying on top of them. I think it's really important to talk amongst your team as well. So you'd be amazed how much you can learn from other people and how many people know other little tricks that you don't know. As a team here at Fresh Egg, we're constantly sharing our knowledge and keeping on top of the platform, and you're learning new things all the time. The next thing is cross-filtering. So you can use a chart to cross-filter into other charts to interact with a subset of data. So for example, if you had a table at the top of your report that looked at marketing channels, if you clicked on paid search from that table, it would then filter down into all the other tables on your report to just be showing paid search data. You can toggle this on in the Style tab. The next thing is copy and paste styling. So if you want to copy the format of one widget onto another widget without having to go through the second widget and re-choose all your colors and your style and your font, you can literally copy the style from the other one, click paste style on the new one, and the data will stay the same, but it will add the formatting of the first widget. So this saves loads of time if you want to implement the same style across multiple widgets or charts. Next, we have report or page level filters. So to avoid adding filters to each chart individually, you can actually set them at report or page level. So as an example, if you wanted to exclude a certain browser from your whole report, you could just add it at report level rather than going through each chart and doing them all individually. The next thing is using shift. So Looker Studio can be a bit troublesome when arranging or moving widgets. You can hold shift and select multiple charts to move them all at once, or you can actually hold shift and use your arrow keys to move your widgets in much smaller increments, so you can line things up really nicely. Double clicking on table columns. So if you've got a table and you want to evenly space your columns, rather than manually dragging them all, you can just double click them and it will space them all out for you, which saves loads of time. Community visualizations and templates. So there are a wealth of visualizations that have been created by other community members. So I mentioned tooltips earlier. That's an example of a community visualization. So it's like a little info box that you can put next to a dimension or a metric, and you can just add a little description in so that when a user hovers over it, it will give them that description. And then templates. There are tons of templates that are made available by Looker. You could use these as your report and just hook your data up to it, or you could use them as a starting point and take little bits from them that might be useful for you. But there's tons in there and they're really, really helpful. Then we've got distribution. So for example, if you had 5 scorecards at the top of your report and you want to line them all up, you can use distribution rather than lining them all up manually, and it puts them all into line for you. So you just go to arrange and align vertically or horizontally. Calculated fields. So I touched on this earlier, but customizing your reports to show metrics that aren't naturally provided to you. So earlier I used ROAS as an example, but if you were doing, say, an e-commerce dashboard, you could use revenue and transactions to calculate average order value. I'd recommend creating these in your data source. And then finally, CSS overview in Chrome. So if you need your brand colors or you need specific colors from a website, you can right click on a web page on Chrome, click view CSS overview, and it will give you all the color codes of the site ready for you to copy over to your reporting dashboards. So what we've covered today, so storytelling with Looker Studio, some dashboard considerations, so thinking about who your audience are, the layout of your dashboard and your visualizations, any customizations, and which metrics are important. The dashboard best practices, so always having that contents page and that top line snapshot. Your naming conventions, so making sure everything's named in the same way. Using comparison metrics to help tell your story, and giving users the metric or dimension descriptions where needed. And then finally, hopefully those tips and tricks are helpful for you and they make using the tool a lot easier. So the final thing from me at this point is to say thank you all for joining this bite-sized session. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. We'll provide you with a video of this session along with the deck, and there will also be a page on our site with all the information from this session, which we'll share via email next week. So now I'll find the Q&A box and I'll open up for some questions for a few minutes. We'll also, on the webpage, we can add any questions I don't get to answering. So if I don't get to your question, feel free to send it to hello@freshegg.com and we will answer it there for you. So the first question, how can I get around the GA4 quota limit? So we'd recommend getting set up on BigQuery, or alternatively, you could use the data extract from GA4 rather than the GA4 API. But as I say, we're running a separate session on how to never lose your GA4 data set. So definitely get signed up for this for some more detail on that. Should I create calculated fields in my data set or in the individual chart? So I'd always recommend creating them in your data set because it will mean that they're consistently available. If you create them in the chart on its own, you'll end up rewriting that formula out multiple times if you need it more than once. But if you do it in your data set, it will be consistently available. I'd also recommend formatting it how you want. So if you want it as a percentage, set that in your data set and you don't have to keep changing the percentage over and over again. Can I monitor my organic search rankings with Looker Studio? So yes, you can do this via the Google Search Console connector, which is built into Looker Studio. You could add a dimension for your organic search queries and then a metric for average position. You could plot this in loads of different ways. So you could plot that with a time series chart with a filter for search query. You could actually even use a custom field and split out brand queries and non-brand queries maybe. Can you directly integrate non-Google sources, i.e. Facebook ads, into Looker Studio? So Facebook ads, there's not a built-in connector, but there's, as I say, there's hundreds of partner connectors. So I know Supermetrics have a Facebook connector, so it's definitely worth looking into some partner connectors and whether you need a license for those. Can I switch my UA dashboard over to GA4 easily? So the first thing to highlight here is that Universal Analytics is sunsetting at the end of June this year. So I'm sure a lot of you are aware of that, but basically making sure that you're set up and running on GA4 before then. But in answer to the question, I would say it's not as simple as just switching the dashboard over. So due to the different nature of Universal Analytics and GA4, you need to make some changes, but I'd suggest probably firstly creating a mapping document so you can outline what events and things you need from your UA dashboard and what the differences are to those events in GA4, so the different parameters that you might need. And then you can think about working out which data source is best for your GA4 dashboard. So whether you want to engineer that in BigQuery or whether you're going to use a data extract. The platforms are quite different, so I wouldn't expect to see exactly the same numbers across UA dashboards in GA4. You'll then have to go through and unfortunately rebuild your dashboard with your GA4 data set, but hopefully by mapping this out before you start, that process should be a lot smoother. So I think that's it for questions. We're out of time, but any questions that I haven't got around to answering, as I say, send through to hello@freshegg.com and I'll do my best to answer. Thank you everyone for joining the session. I hope it's been helpful and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.